a sun-drenched village nestled in the heart of West Africa, Jaro moved quietly through his day, carrying a worn leather satchel and a humble, persistent silence. He wasn't the kind of man people noticed, thin, soft-spoken, and often overlooked, especially because of the way he spoke. His words came slowly, hesitantly, shaped by a stutter and thick rural accent that made city folks smirk and whisper behind their hands. But Jaro didn't flinch. He listened, always listened. Every morning, he rode a battered motorbike into the city, navigating dust-choked roads until the great courthouse came into view, a colonial-era building that loomed like judgment itself. Inside, Jaro was known as the messenger boy. He fetched tea, sorted papers, and was occasionally sent to deliver legal notices. He was expected to bow politely, speak as little as possible, and remain invisible. That was how the lawyers liked it. That was how Judge Cartwright liked it most of all. Judge Cartwright had been in the country for over a decade, but his tone had never changed. Patronizing, sharp, and full of a certain superiority that dripped with quiet disdain. He referred to Jaro as that helper with the heavy tongue. On more than one occasion, Jaro had overheard him speaking to clerks, mocking the way Jaro struggled to pronounce submission or jurisdiction. He should stick to carrying files, Cartwright once muttered. Barely speaks English. But what no one knew was what Jaro did each night. After the courthouse closed and the corridors emptied, he often remained behind, claiming to clean or organize records. In truth, he was studying. For years, he had scavenged second-hand bookstores, old law journals, and even discarded briefs to teach himself the language of justice. He memorized landmark cases. He traced constitutional clauses in pencil over and over again until they were etched into memory. What fascinated Jaro most wasn't just the law in English, it was its origin, the old Roman terms. The Latin codes hidden in the roots of modern judgment captivated him. Habeas corpus, in loco parentis, quid pro quo. These weren't just fancy phrases. They were the bones of the justice system, and Jaro knew them better than anyone suspected. While the others laughed at his silence, he absorbed their arrogance and turned it into fire. His stutter didn't stop him from learning. His accent didn't prevent him from understanding. In fact, the very things they mocked became the reasons he pushed harder. Because he wasn't just learning for himself, he was preparing for something bigger, though even he didn't know what it was yet. Each night, as the courthouse echoed with emptiness, Jaro sat beneath the old ceiling fans with a cracked notebook in his lap, lips moving in whispered Latin. To anyone watching, he was still the messenger. But in his heart, he was already standing in the courtroom, not as a servant, but as a speaker of justice. And the day would come, sooner than anyone believed, when the boy they ignored would make the courtroom listen. The smell of sweat and soil still lingered on Jaro's father when he walked into the courthouse, hat in hand, face lined with years of labour under the scorching sun. He had worked his farm for over 3 decades, turning dry land into green hope. Now that land, his pride, his legacy, was being taken from him. A powerful company, backed by foreign investors and hidden deals, had filed a case claiming the land was never his. They presented forged papers, bought testimonies, and filed documents so thick and clean they looked untouchable. For Jaro's father, the truth didn't matter. The truth didn't have lawyers. When Jaro heard the news, his stomach twisted. His father, who taught him how to plant yams and live with dignity, now sat in court like a criminal, and the lawyer assigned to his defense was a joke. A man who barely read the case file, arrived late, and dismissed Jaro with a casual wave when he tried to speak. "Let the grown-ups handle this," the lawyer said with a smirk. Jaro stood behind the wooden benches, gripping his father's land documents, real ones, stained with sweat and signed by a chief long gone. He watched as the company's lawyer twisted facts, painting his father as a squatter. The judge barely raised an eyebrow. Then came the moment Jaro couldn't stay silent, when the company's lawyer falsely claimed that the farmer had never paid taxes on the land. Jaro stood up, holding a crumpled receipt from years ago. His voice shook as he tried to speak. "Excuse me, sir, that's not true. This receipt shows." Judge Cartwright slammed his gavel. "Sit down," he said sharply. "Speak proper English or don't speak at all." The courtroom chuckled. The company lawyer smirked. Jaro's face burned with humiliation, but he didn't move. Not at first. His father tugged his sleeve, whispering, "Let it go, son. These people don't listen to us." That night, Jaro didn't sleep. He sat on the steps of the courthouse long after everyone had gone, replaying the moment over and over. The taste of shame lingered, but beneath it, rage. A quiet, intelligent rage. How could speaking truth ever be silenced by an accent? How could justice belong only to those who wore suits well and used polished English? The next morning, he arrived early, ready to fight beside the lawyer. But the lawyer didn't come. Instead, a short letter arrived, a withdrawal from the case. No longer representing client due to unforeseen conflicts, unspoken truth. He didn't think it was worth the trouble. Jaro's father sat on the court steps, head in hands. "Maybe we just give them the land," he muttered. "It's not worth your peace. They already made up their minds." But Jaro stared at the doors of the courthouse. Inside were shelves of law books. Inside were tools, languages, codes, and he knew them. Maybe not like they did, maybe better. "No," he said quietly. "Let them hear me again." His father looked up, confused, but something in Jaro's eyes had changed. Not pride, not anger, purpose. This case had stopped being about just land. It had become something else. It had become the reason he had been learning all those nights in silence. The court basement was cold and dim, the kind of place where forgotten records went to gather dust, and where people like Jaro were never expected to find purpose. But for him, this space of shadows and silence became his sanctuary. By day, he still delivered papers and fetched tea. But by night, when the last gavel had fallen and the courthouse emptied, Jaro returned with a notebook, a stack of old legal books, and something harder to extinguish than hope: resolve. The day after the lawyer abandoned the case, Jaro submitted a handwritten petition to the court, a formal request to represent his father pro se, without a lawyer. It was an unusual move, especially in a case of this size. Technically, the law allowed it, but practically, few had ever dared. The court staff laughed when they saw the petition. One of the clerks whispered loud enough for Jaro to hear, "Next, he'll want to be the judge too." The laughter rippled until it reached Judge Cartwright's ears. Cartwright read the petition slowly, expression unreadable at first. Then he looked up at Jaro, standing in his patched trousers and second-hand shirt. "You want to stand in this courtroom," he said, voice sharp, "and represent your father in a land dispute?" "You?" Jaro nodded. Yes, Your Honour." Cartwright's lip curled. "This isn't a market square, boy. This is law, in English." The words stung, but Jaro didn't flinch this time. He simply bowed his head. "I understand." He was granted the right to represent his father, if only because Cartwright was sure it would be a spectacle, and so the storm began, not with thunder, but with the quiet turning of pages deep in the court's forgotten corners. Jaro pored over old case files, sometimes reading until dawn. He compared judgments, traced the judge's patterns of reasoning, and studied rulings going back decades. He found precedents, obscure but relevant, where land rights had been protected based on customary ownership and village declarations, things long buried beneath colonial-era bureaucracy. But Jaro knew facts weren't enough. Words were weapons in this courtroom, and his opponents were masters of them. So he went deeper. He pulled out forgotten legal dictionaries and began learning the Latin beneath the law. Actus reus, mens rea, prima facie, amicus curiae. Not only did he learn what they meant, he learned how to use them, how to make them work for his case, how to speak them not like a parrot, but like someone who understood the skeleton beneath the skin of the legal system. Late at night, he stood in front of a cracked mirror and practiced speaking, not to remove his accent, but to control his rhythm. He stuttered through phrases 100 times until they rolled off his tongue with quiet power. He also began to learn Judge Cartwright, his phrases, his logic, his blind spots. He noticed that Cartwright favoured decisions that aligned with historical precedent and respected original legislative intent. Jaro used this. He found rulings the judge had written himself, quoted his own words, and built arguments designed to trigger Cartwright's ego, not confront it. Day by day, Jaro's fear transformed into form. His shame became sharpness. The stutter didn't go away. It simply found a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of justice. He wasn't just preparing for court anymore. He was becoming a storm the courtroom would never see coming. The courtroom was already packed when Jaro arrived. Curious eyes followed him as he stepped through the heavy doors, clutching a weathered file and wearing a second-hand suit that didn't quite fit. His shoes were scuffed, soles thin from years of use, but his walk was steady. And his eyes, sharp, focused, lit from within by something far stronger than confidence, clarity. Whispers rippled across the benches. "Isn't that the messenger boy?" "No, that's the farmer's son, I think. He's representing the case." Someone laughed under their breath. "This will be short." Jaro stood before the bench, facing Judge Cartwright. The judge didn't look up right away. He pretended to shuffle some papers, letting the silence stretch like a rope about to snap. Finally, without raising his head fully, he said, "You may proceed. If you can speak English this time." The courtroom chuckled, but Jaro didn't flinch. He adjusted his papers slowly, drew a steady breath, and then he spoke. "Fiat justitia ruat caelum." The laughter stopped. Heads turned. A few people blinked in confusion. The Latin words echoed through the room like a bell. Judge Cartwright looked up sharply, eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" Jaro looked him in the eye. "Let justice be done, though the heavens fall." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. He didn't wait. With precise calm, Jaro launched into his opening statement. He wove English and Latin together like silk and steel, citing Lex Loti, Nemo dat quod non habet, and the foundational principle of bona fide possession. He referenced colonial land acts, many of which the court had long forgotten, and showed how, even under outdated legislation, his father's ownership was valid. He explained that local chiefs' land grants, recognized under historical mandates, remained enforceable when consistent with written law. He didn't stumble. He didn't shrink. He spoke with a rhythm born of nights in the basement and words learned in silence. He quoted from Cartwright's own past rulings, word for word, and used them to support his claims. The judge blinked, visibly unsettled. Even the opposing counsel was caught off guard. The company's lawyer, polished and paid well, had expected a stumbling boy. Instead, he faced a strategist cloaked in humility. Jaro ended his introduction with another Latin phrase, "Veritas vos liberabit." Then he translated, "The truth shall set you free." Silence followed. Cartwright leaned back in his chair, hands folded beneath his chin. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The shift in the room said it all. No one was laughing now. Jaro returned to his seat beside his father, who sat wide-eyed, lips parted, but speechless. Jaro leaned over, gently squeezing his hand. The old farmer whispered, "Where did you learn all that?" Jaro only replied, in the same place they taught me I didn't belong. It was the first day of trial, and the boy they had ignored had just rewritten the room's balance of power. The sun was high by the time Jaro rose from his seat for cross-examination. He adjusted his collar, walked calmly to the centre of the courtroom, and faced the sleek corporate attorney, an older man with silver hair, polished shoes, and a reputation for bulldozing rural cases in a single day. But Jaro didn't bring noise. He brought precision. He began by requesting the original land deeds submitted by the company. The opposing lawyer, smirking, passed the documents over. Jaro spread them out on the desk before him, then pulled from his own stack a faded but notarized deed signed by the village chief 3 decades prior. Jaro held both up. "Do you notice the parcel ID numbers, sir?" he asked. The corporate lawyer nodded confidently. "Of course, they match." Jaro smiled faintly. "Look again." The room leaned in. The corporate lawyer frowned. Jaro stepped forward. "This," he said, tapping the company's deed, "lists parcel 18B. But this," he continued, holding up his father's, "clearly states 18B East. Different boundary, different claim. And if Your Honour consults Section 4 of the 1979 Land Reform Act, it's clear, without matching perimeter coordinates, the claim is invalid." The lawyer stumbled. That's a technicality." Jaro straightened. "Justice lives in the technicalities." Then he moved in deeper. He presented the court with evidence that the same company had previously filed and lost a claim against Jaro's neighbour using nearly identical arguments. "Res judicata," Jaro stated calmly. "The matter was judged. Repackaging it under a new name does not change the law." The crowd murmured. Cartwright's brow furrowed. Jaro wasn't done. He turned back to the company lawyer. "Your claim suggests my father took land illegally. That would require proof of actus reus, a guilty action. Do you have any?" The lawyer fumbled. "Well, he worked the land," Jaro pressed. "With whose permission?" The lawyer was silent. Jaro held up a document signed by the late village chief giving his father permanent rights of use. "No actus reus, no guilty action, no case." And finally, he delivered the cut that made the room sit in breathless stillness. "Even if there was confusion over the land," Jaro said, voice calm but sharp, "the law demands equity. In pari delicto, when both parties share fault, the court withholds favour. Your client's own documents show knowledge of disputed ownership, yet they pushed forward anyway. That alone bars this claim." The opposing lawyer raised his hand in frustration. "Objection, Your Honour. This isn't even understandable English." A nervous laugh spread through the courtroom, uncertain, testing the air. But Judge Cartwright didn't laugh. He leaned forward slightly, voice even. "Actually," he said, clearing his throat, "he's not wrong. Latin is the root of our law. You may proceed, Mr. Jaro." The room fell completely silent. The weight of that sentence, "Mr. Jaro," hung in the air like a flag raised after battle. Jaro gave a single nod and turned back to his father, who sat frozen with wide, damp eyes. The old man didn't speak, but the slight quiver of his lips said everything: pride, wonder, and disbelief. In that moment, the courtroom wasn't just witnessing a defense. It was watching the law being wielded like a sword in hands no one thought strong enough to lift it. The final day of trial arrived with a stillness that felt different. Even the air inside the courtroom seemed to pause, as though it knew something important was about to happen. The benches were filled again. Clerks, reporters, villagers, curious onlookers. The story had spread beyond whispers now. The boy with the stutter, the Latin-speaking son of a farmer, the messenger turned advocate. Jaro sat quietly beside his father, his papers neatly stacked, his suit pressed more carefully than before. There was no tremble in his hands, no hesitation in his eyes. Judge Cartwright entered with his usual command, but something about his demeanour had shifted. Less disdain, More deliberation. He looked at Jaro not like a curiosity, but like a question he hadn't yet answered. Cartwright motioned. You may give your closing. Jaro rose, slowly. He didn't bring notes this time. He didn't need them. He stepped into the center of the room and took a moment before speaking. When this trial began, he said, his voice calm, you told me to speak proper English, but law wasn't born in English. It was born in principle, and in Latin. A few people shifted in their seats. Cartwright leaned slightly forward. My father worked that land since before I was born. He has papers signed by hands no longer living. His neighbors know that soil holds the bones of our family, the sweat of 3 generations. But that wasn't enough for this courtroom. You wanted something else. You wanted words dressed in suits, and accents with polish. Jaro paused, letting silence stretch just enough to make people lean in. But justice, he continued, doesn't wear suits. It doesn't care for accents. It only listens for truth. He looked directly at the judge now. If you cannot hear justice in my tongue, then perhaps you were never listening. A deep hush fell over the room. No papers rustled, no shoes shifted. Only the weight of those words hung in the air. Jaro stepped back, bowed gently, and returned to his seat. His father touched his arm. No words, just a proud grip that trembled against his son's stillness. Judge Cartwright stared at his desk for a long while. He didn't move, didn't speak. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting not just for a verdict, but for something greater. Finally, Cartwright cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was flat but firm. This court finds no credible evidence to support the company's claim. He looked up. The land shall remain in the name of Mr. Bacco. Case dismissed. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then gasps. One woman clapped before covering her mouth. A low murmur rose across the room like a tide, swelling with awe, disbelief, and quiet celebration. Jaro sat still, his hands folded, his breathing calm, his stutter gone, not forced away, not hidden, but melted into something stronger, something steady. Judge Cartwright looked at him one last time, eyes narrowed not with mockery, but thought. Perhaps, for the first time, he was really seeing him. And for the first time, Jaro didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He had already spoken the loudest language in the courtroom. Justice. After the courtroom emptied and the last whispers faded into the courthouse halls, Jaro remained seated beside his father for a long while. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. His father held his hand gently, pride and emotion fighting for space behind weathered eyes. The land was safe. But something bigger had been restored too. Dignity. Just as they prepared to leave, a bailiff approached Jaro and quietly said, Judge Cartwright wants to see you, in chambers. Jaro's heart stirred. His father gave him a reassuring nod. He walked the familiar halls, the same ones where he had once been invisible, where his name had been a whisper of mockery. Now, every glance felt different. People stepped aside. Some stared. Some even nodded. Inside the judge's chambers, Cartwright sat behind a polished mahogany desk, the window behind him casting soft light across a room lined with leather-bound law volumes. Jaro stood tall, not nervous, just ready. Cartwright didn't look up at first. He thumbed through a document in silence, perhaps deliberately. When he finally raised his eyes, they didn't carry their usual coldness, just calculation. You didn't win because of pity, Cartwright said flatly. Jaro nodded once. I know, Cartwright grunted. You read more law than most who passed the bar. There was a pause. Cartwright reached into a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. I've spoken to a magistrate in Accra, he said. There's an internship available. Unpaid, naturally, but you'd have access to legal research materials, shadow real trials, learn the system from the inside. Jaro's lips parted slightly. He wasn't sure what surprised him more, The offer or the fact that Cartwright had arranged it himself? It's not charity, the judge added. Frankly, I'd rather you be working inside the system than outside it. With that mind of yours, better to have you on this side of the bench. Jaro blinked. Thank you, Your Honor. Cartwright waved a dismissive hand. Don't thank me. Just don't embarrass me. As Jaro left the chambers, the courthouse halls buzzed with a new kind of energy. Clerks who used to chuckle when he passed now stopped him with questions. Mr. Jaro, could I see that citation you mentioned yesterday about res judicata? Where did you find that precedent from 1979? It's not even digitized. Jaro answered humbly, offering page numbers, sections, case names, all from memory. Confidence radiated from him now, not as a shield, but as part of his skin. Then the click of a camera. A young journalist stood near the steps of the court entrance. Sir, she said, voice quick and hopeful. Do you have a moment? We're running a story. The messenger who mastered the courtroom. Mind sharing how you did it? He looked at her, then at the courthouse behind him, its towering walls, its broken ceilings, its doors that once shut him out. I listened, he said quietly, even when no one was listening to me. Flash. The image would later appear on the front page of the national paper. Jaro, standing in his second-hand suit, a folder under one arm, the courthouse rising behind him like a monument he had conquered. And in small villages and big cities across the country, young men and women who spoke with stutters, wore simple clothes or carried thick accents, saw him not just as a man who won a case, but as a man who broke a mold. A new voice had entered the halls of justice, and it had come not in perfect English, but in perfect truth. Years had passed since that first trial, but the name Jaro still echoed through courtrooms and classrooms alike, not as a curiosity, but as a legend, now far from the dusty village courthouse where it all began. Jaro stood at the front of a grand university lecture hall, dressed in a flowing black robe trimmed with gold. The room was silent, but alive with the anticipation of young minds ready to learn from a man whose story had once travelled from whispered headlines to national inspiration. His eyes scanned the sea of faces, some fresh and wide-eyed, others older and determined, some with shy demeanours, others brimming with confidence. He saw himself in many of them, a boy with worn shoes, a nervous voice, a head full of questions. He smiled softly and began, as he always did. Law isn't the voice of the powerful, he said, pacing slowly. It is the whisper of justice, waiting for someone to listen. The words hung in the air, timeless and electric. He didn't speak like the others. He didn't rush or perform. He taught like someone planting seeds, trusting that they would bloom long after the room had emptied. The students leaned in, hungry to catch every word. He opened a warm book on the lectern, filled with yellowed pages and handwritten notes. Fiat justitia ruat caelum, he recited calmly. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall. A few students scribbled quickly. One or two just stared, spellbound. Then Jaro did something he always made time for. He spoke in his old village dialect, slowly, clearly, explaining the Latin phrase in the language that had once been ridiculed as broken or unfit for law. A girl in the front row smiled with quiet pride. A boy at the back, who stammered when asking questions, sat up straighter. Your preferences, quirks, and stories aren't just details. They're pieces of you that he's collecting, understanding, and cherishing. When someone remembers the small stuff, it builds emotional safety. You feel seen, understood, valued. It's not about grand romantic gestures. It's about someone showing they care through simple, intentional moments. And often, these are the signs that mean the most, because they're not loud or forced. They're real. His memory of those small details is his way of saying, I am paying attention because you're important to me. It's emotional closeness without needing to declare it. And sometimes, that quiet care speaks louder than any words ever could. 3. He talks about the future with you in it. When a man starts talking about the future and includes you in it, it's a strong indication that he's becoming emotionally invested. This shift doesn't always come with a big announcement. It can begin subtly through simple phrases like, "We should go there someday," or "Imagine us living in a place like that." These glimpses into the future aren't just daydreams. They are reflections of how he's beginning to see you as a lasting part of his life, including you in his future plans. Whether it's something small like attending an event together next month, or something bigger like travel, career moves, or even building a home, is his way of creating emotional permanence. It shows that he's not just in the moment with you, but he's actively imagining a life where your presence continues to matter. These conversations aren't made lightly. They require a level of emotional comfort, stability, and hope. Hope that the bond you share is worth building upon. When he starts planning things more around you or using "we" more than "I", it means you've become part of his vision. It may not be a formal promise, but it's a quiet declaration that he sees potential in what you're sharing. Emotional closeness often shows up in this way, not with dramatic confessions, but with consistent thoughts of togetherness. Talking about the future with you in it shows he's not just experiencing connection, he's committing to it, even if he hasn't said the words out loud. And in those subtle moments, you begin to see that what you have is not temporary. It's something he's beginning to hold on to. 4. He shares his fears and insecurities. When a man begins to share his fears and insecurities with you, it's a deeply emotional sign that he is growing closer. These parts of him are often hidden from the world, protected, guarded, sometimes even denied. Opening that vulnerable space isn't easy, especially for someone who's been taught to be strong, silent, or in control. So when he allows you to see the things that make him feel small, uncertain, or exposed, it means he trusts you on a level that goes far beyond casual connection. This kind of emotional honesty doesn't happen overnight. It grows in the quiet safety of being understood. It might come out in fragments, a late-night conversation, a moment of silence that turns into truth, or even in something simple like the words, "Sometimes I don't feel good enough." These moments are not weakness. They're acts of courage. He's handing you something fragile, saying without words, "This is the part of me I don't show everyone." Sharing fears isn't about needing solutions. It's about needing to be seen without being judged. If he's opening up about what hurts, what keeps him up at night, or what he's afraid to lose, it means he sees you as someone safe enough to hold those truths. That kind of vulnerability is sacred. It marks the point where the relationship moves from surface to soul. And in choosing to be that real with you, he's not just revealing who he is, he's showing how deeply he wants to be known, not just loved. That's emotional closeness in its rawest, most human form. 5. He becomes more physically affectionate. When a man becomes more physically affectionate, especially in gentle, thoughtful ways, it often signals a deeper emotional connection forming beneath the surface. Physical touch, when rooted in emotion rather than impulse, becomes a quiet language of closeness. It's no longer just about attraction. It becomes about comfort, presence, and care. A touch on your back as you walk together, holding your hand without needing a reason, resting his head near yours, or simply staying close to you. These actions carry meaning without the need for explanation. This kind of affection isn't always dramatic or grand. It can be subtle, even soft, but it's consistent. He might reach for your hand during silence, pull you closer during a quiet moment, or rest his arm around you as if your presence gives him peace. These gestures aren't calculated, they're instinctive. His body naturally wants to be near you, not just out of desire, but out of emotional comfort. It's how he says, "I'm here," without speaking,